Well, here we are, back again, 48 hours later. I guess you're all gluttons for punishment. You like your brains being spilled on the floor and everything tipped upside down and ruined. Well, why not? This is the Truth, Honour and Integrity Show. My name's Thomas Williams. Enjoy the show. I think we've all been thunderstruck with the last few shows as the veil of secrecy, distortions and lies are coming to the fore now. And the truth is permeating the planet and the dark forces are on the run and also in fear. The planting of many seeds, whether from THI or the blueprint teams, are also now bearing fruit. And we can all give ourselves a tiny pat on the back for that. But this is just the start, and much more is needed to be done. Now I'm asking for more of you to migrate to the new website b.thenewblueprintforhumanity.org site and become more familiar with the site. It's absolutely fantastic what the web team have done, and so let's migrate. And in particular, those of you involved in the working groups, everything will be transferred over to there. There'll be no postings in the MeWe chats or the Blueprint chats, etc., etc. Everything will be centralised, and so everybody knows what's going on and where everything is and how everything unfolds. Right, we'll go into the news section now. And this one piece is in the news section, but it's also society news section and also from his story to our story section, as our story reaches a much wider audience these days. But the Elon Musk, who was born in South Africa and is a tech billionaire, has once again criticised Julius Malema, who is the leader of the economic freedom fighters in South Africa. Now, Musk was responding to a post by End Wokeness, featuring a compilation of edited clips advocating for violence against white individuals. Now, Julius Malema has repeatedly called for the genocide of the 4 million whites living in South Africa, and Malema could very possibly be elected as the next Prime Minister within the next few months. But there has been zero international outrage that End Wokeness posted or pointed out. And imagine if that was said the other way around. The outrage and the labels would be enormous. Now Musk counterattacked by delivering another criticism aimed at Malema and the likely future leader of South Africa and his calls for the 4 million whites who lived there, he wrote, should be stopped. Now we have many South Africans tuning into our show, and most of them are white, and I hope and we pray that they're all safe out there. Here's another positive piece and shows the power of the people coming together again. And this is so refreshing to see now, and our message must be rammed home of: we are no longer tolerating your stupidity, control or harvesting. As the European Union's executive arm shelved an anti-pesticide proposal last Tuesday in yet another concession to the farmers in Europe, after weeks of protests that blocked many capitals and economic lifelines across the 27-nation bloc. Now, although the proposal has languished in EU institutions for the past 2 years, the move by the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen was the latest indication that the bloc is willing to sacrifice environmental priorities to keep the farming community on its side. What does that tell you? We, the people, always had the power. And as long as we stand up together, these clowns will back down. They have no other option. This is what we all have to understand. You apply enough pressure, they buckle. They'll buckle far easily now than ever. Now, despite concessions, protests continued from the Netherlands to Spain and Bulgaria, and farmers have insisted that measures like the one on pesticides would increase bureaucratic burdens and keep them behind laptops instead of farming, just like the police really, adding to the price gap between their products and cheap imports produced by foreign farmers without similar burdens. I wonder who they may be. Well, we'll find out soon. Now, under its much-hyped European Green Deal, the EU has targeted a 50% cut in the overall use of pesticides and other hazard substances by 2030. And the proposal was criticised by both environmentalists, who claimed it would be insufficient to reach sustainability targets, and by agricultural groups who insisted it would be unworkable and drive farmers out of business. And if they go out of business, Bill Gates seems to take over their land, it seems. Well, perhaps not so much in the future. Perhaps he will be given some of that land back. Or maybe all of it. Now, the decision to shelve the proposal on pesticides was the EU's latest act of political self-retribution in reaction to protests that have affected the daily lives of tens of millions of EU citizens and has cost businesses tens of millions of euros due to transportation delays. And last week, von der Leyen announced plans to shield farmers from cheaper products coming from the Ukraine, and to allow farmers to use some land they had been required to keep fallow for so-called environmental reasons. Now, in France, where the protests gained critical mass, the government promised more than 400 million euros in additional financial support to their farmers. Meanwhile, protests continued in many EU nations, and since early Tuesday, farmers across Spain staged tractor protests, blocking highways and causing traffic jams to demand changes in EU policies and funds, and also measures to combat production cost increases. Now, the protest came as the Agricultural Ministry announced some 270 million euros in aid to 140,000 farmers to address drought conditions and problems caused allegedly by Russia's war against Ukraine. Now, Bulgarian farmers added fuel to their protests by moving their heavy farming vehicles from the fields to the main motorways and border crossings, paralysing traffic and adding to the economic woes of the country. On Monday night, farmers in Netherlands blocked several roads and highways with their tractors and burned hay bales and tyres. The police in the rural province of Gelderland said they took action against farmers blocking roads, but there were no immediate reports of arrests. And in recent weeks, farmers have protested in Poland, Greece, Ireland, Germany and Lithuania. They have no option but to concede or make concessions now, as they are being driven into fear by a baying public. They don't have the resources either, as much to fight back anymore. But more importantly now, it seems the public is not allowing them to continue their tirade against us. Here is something that is perhaps signalling a sea of change between government and its people, considered tiny for some but can be huge for others. And that's the case for some of California's unsheltered homeless community, which hopes to benefit from a promise by state officials nearly a year ago to provide over 1,000 tiny home shelters free of charge. Now, the Governor, Gavin Newsom, Pelosi offspring, committed $1 billion in March to address the state's homelessness crisis, with tiny homes in Los Angeles, Sacramento, San Diego and San Jose. Now, California has one of the most severe homeless problems in the country, and there are over 180,000 homeless people in the state, according to the 2023 data. And that alarming statistic accounts for 28% of America's total homeless population, just in one state. And the reason being is the greed within certain sections of that state of multi-million-dollar homes leaves a void at the bottom. But kudos to California for giving something back. But you can buy and install far more than around 1,000 tiny homes with $1 billion. And it'd be interesting to see who has the contract to build the homes is given to, and I hope the people there scrutinise that. The mortgage solution in our blueprint will solve all housing issues within this country and others. And here is why the people don't have enough money for things like homeless shelters or other services, as the National Science Foundation is allocating over $900,000 in taxpayer funds to 3 universities. What for? To conduct a study claiming biology courses inaccurately portray sex and gender as binary, in order to make them more inclusive for transgender and non-binary students. Now, the study aims to explore how sex and gender topics are taught, their impact on transgender students' belonging and interest, and ways to create a more inclusive curriculum acknowledging diversity in sexes and the complex relationship between a sex and a gender. What a complete waste of money and resources that is. The country is collapsing, but they can still send monies to Ukraine, Israel, and for ridiculous programs like this. And common sense has to prevail in the future for us all to prosper. This is an intel update as to how things really unfold in Gaza and the attack. The 7th of October, it was said, was a very successful military raid, and 1,200 Israelis died, 400 of them military. Around 800 deaths left to analyse. 160 Israeli civilians were killed by Hamas, and 640 plus Israeli civilians were killed by the Israeli Defence Forces. Oops. Over half of the Israelis that had died on October the 7th was done by the IDF. Hamas took the servers from the Israeli intelligence with all the names of the Israeli informants in Gaza, and all agents are now killed. Many Israeli commanders were relieved from duty as they refused to have their soldiers killed, which suggests finally that the people in Israel are beginning to see what is unfolding and are sick of sacrificing their own people. The reservists were ineffective. The commanders had to do the job themselves and died. After October the 7th, Palestinians, 24,000 dead. Around 12,000 of them are children and 56,000 wounded. 100 Israeli soldiers are dead and 2,000 soldiers permanently disabled and 3,000 wounded. That's not what gets told on CNN, is it? And whether Israel ultimately win this war or delude themselves enough to win the war, this false flag event will ultimately lead to their demise on a much wider scale. They have lost the narrative, and finally their own people are now starting to see through the whole illusion of those operating at the top of the Israeli power structure. The world has now had enough of their war and looting and are fighting back, leaving its hidden power structure back in England and France on the brink of decimation also. And this all had to play out, and sacrifices were made along the way to finally end the Israeli menace here, that hampers, harvests and destroys so much. Then we can set about creating a planet in our image, which is the blueprint, not in their image. The rest of the news section is completed by my analysis of the historic Putin meeting that was released around the time of the last show has now begun to unfold. The BBC and the US networks are scrambling to discredit it, describing it as history revisionism, which is ironic, as we all have heard his story, never our or their story. So why are they so scared of the interview? Because they fear the investigation is why. But truth never fears investigation. And so now as I start going through the interview, even early on into it, I can see as to why they fear it so much. The early part of it is a replay of our first Rus piece that spawned what is now called the Vader series, where we spoke of the history of Russia and Ukraine from the 800s up to the modern day, including having to correct some of it or proffer a slightly alternative opinion. And the reason being is, about 15 minutes into it, Putin started to sow the seeds of doubt with his veiled references to Stalin and Lenin plus the Bolsheviks. And perhaps at this point he or they are not ready to reveal the deeper conspiracy of the involvement of the Jewish in Russian affairs. Now we at THI over many years have peeled back that onion layer, and now you all see who and what are the problem in the USSR and now Russia, but also globally. And he went on to describing the skullduggery of the UN and NATO, changing the rules already agreed upon and 5 times expanding east when the 1991 Accord forbade it. And under such provocation, it is a testament to Russia itself that they displayed such patience and tolerance. Repeated attempts at peace, all rebuffed in many war theatres, yet the media, courtesy of the agency clowns, all ignore those basic facts. He revealed of how the CIA started working within Russia for the enemies of Russia, and these will be the Bolsheviks and or Zito-Masons we revealed in the From His Story to Our Story series. He confirmed that America was not being run by the government, but the agencies. He described creating a joint missile defence system with Europe and America, and that was rebuffed also. He stated something that I said in a show some years back. The Russian military technology was way more advanced than any other nation. And that is 100% correct. Putin then described how the Ukraine constitution, the elections and trade underwent a coup d'etat by the CIA again. He spoke of eliminating the neo-Nazis in Ukraine, hinting that whilst they are around, Ukraine will always be in turmoil. And he said these are the people who killed the Poles, Jews and Russians in World War II, he said. Now, Putin looked away from Carlson when asked, "What do you mean by denazification?" And he looked a tad uncomfortable and appeared to be trying to formulate an answer without dropping the major bombshells surrounding the issue. We at THI have had no restraints and have just called it out, because that is the right thing to do and it is the truth. But Putin was careful with this interview not to create major bombshells of the hidden narrative, as that would create deflections from his speech and instigate the conspiracy theorist levels in the controlled media. He mentioned Zelensky being Jewish. Carlson immediately interjected, and Putin knew he was deflecting him away from the Jewish narrative, describing his question as pesky and subtle. He spoke of Zelensky and the Canadian Parliament openly applauding an SS officer who admitted murdering Poles, Jews and Russians, and they all applauded him. And so, whilst Zelensky is a Jew himself, he supported the elimination of around 150,000 Jewish people in World War II. Does that make any sense? No. Why? Because these types of Jews are not Jews at all, as we have attested all along. Putin spoke of agreements made in Istanbul to end the Ukraine conflict, and the West, which is the Jewish establishment, said you have to pull back your troops from Kiev. Russia pulled back their troops, and the West cancelled all the agreements and said we have to fight Russia until the bitter end. Putin revealed he hadn't spoken to Mask Man Biden since his presidency, as he said there was no point. But what was also revealed was a peace agreement to take place between Ukraine and Russia. It has to go through the United States to be finalised, or even to have talks. What has the US got to do with Ukraine and their sovereignty? And who made them the owners of Ukraine? Ukraine belongs to Russia and Ukraine currently, but Russia was allowing Ukrainian citizens the right to be independent, should they wish, as long as they got rid of Nazism. But the US and their CIA enforcement arm wants to station there, you see, just like they have in many other European countries under the banner of NATO. Are you seeing the real problem now? The entity known as the US or U.S. neither of which are anything to do with America. Because America underwent the same CIA-led coup around 80 years ago. Does anyone ask as to why a so-called intelligence agency should own and run whole countries? The greater question is, who are these people? And the deeper question, are these people at all? NATO are mind controlling the people of Europe with the narrative of an imaginary Russian threat that has been ongoing since the three plans labelled as prophecies in the 1880s by Albert Pike, more so since the creation of the CIA. And he mentioned about the American and European taxpayers being made to cough up more funds due to the fake Russian threat. He responded to Chuck Schumer's fear propaganda about American soldiers may have to fight in Ukraine if we didn't stop funding Ukraine. But Putin said, why would they need to send American troops when they have mercenaries there already, including a large number of Polish mercenaries plus Georgian? He then mentions we need to return to common sense and look for solutions, just like we have at THI. Now, Carlson then asked who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, and Putin laughing pointed at Tucker and said, you. He then proceeded to state the CIA. And that was the second reference by Putin linking Carlson with the CIA, jokingly or otherwise. Carlson then asked why he didn't present the evidence of CIA involvement and win a propaganda victory. Putin laughed and said, it is difficult when the world's media is largely controlled by the US media. He stated that Germany, who lost out heavily due to the Nord Stream pipeline explosion, haven't said anything because they are controlled by the NATO CIA West Alliance. And then Putin interestingly spoke about the two hemispheres and linked it to our brain. One side does one thing, the other side does another. But he said it should all be one. Which certainly links up with our own piece about the sword within, as we've done many times in shows. He said security should be shared, which echoes our blueprint solution for the military. And whilst the head is split in two parts, he said, it is an illness and a severe disease. He then spoke of the American policies undermining the dollar that damages its country and people, the transfer over from dollars into using the yuan, which is helping China, and asked why would you do that? Well, the real reason why is because those clowns are still trying to make China the new station for the Federal Reserve and the UN. Guess what? That'll fail. And he kept mentioning the boogeyman story and how China is another boogeyman, and stated America is hurting itself by not cooperating with China in terms of trade and business. He described it as a silver bullet policy, which was interesting. A bullet made of silver, often used in fiction, which what we know is fact, as a supposedly magical method of killing werewolves, vampires, witches, or other supernatural beings. And from a THI perspective, that was a very interesting analogy. He then said, you cannot stop the sun from rising, and America needs a radical change of policies and stop using militaristic elements to solve everything. He was then asked would he work with a change of regime in America, and the answer was telling. He said it's not about the personality, but about the elite's mindset. US is all about dominance, yet it is failing as the world has changed, he said. The largest sanctions are against Russia, stopping the SWIFT system payments, which means the trustee is no longer in control of the SWIFT system, or she's going along with the sanctions. He wouldn't answer the question of who are the ruling class running America. But he did say America needs people who think, look forward, can analyse and recommend certain decisions at the level of political leaders. Think, future think, look forward, analyse and recommend decisions at a political leader's level. Was that a heads up to THI and the blueprint? He spoke of the Christianization of Russia and how Russia, they are supportive of all other religions within Russia. And then said religion is not about external manifestations, going to church every day or banging your head on the floor. It is in the heart. Oh my, what a statement that was. Then he went on to mention Genghis Khan, the Roman Empire and the barbarians and how they grew economically. But it took 5 centuries for the Roman Empire to fall, he said. But what is happening now is all the processes are happening much quicker. Everything is now speeding up, he said, echoing the timepieces done in our show. He then spoke about creating the superhumans and AI, and then said Elon Musk has a chip in his brain, and tasked Carlson to getting with Musk to formalise certain objectives and rules, which is interesting on a blueprint level. Warned humanity has to consider about genetic research and AI issues, again something we covered in the blueprint. Carlson then asked could Ivan Gershkovich be released from Russia and stated that he was not a spy, he's just a kid. This is not true. Gershkovich, a former New York Times and now Wall Street journalist, was obtaining classified documents in Russia and was using the information covertly. That is espionage. So why is there a furore over Gershkovich? Because yet again, he's Jewish. The Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, also Jewish, spoke to his counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, on April the 2nd and expressed grave concern over Gershkovich's arrest. Mr. Lavrov has also received our blueprint book. It ended with Putin saying if the West wants to fix it, they need to come to the table with a genuine agreement and the war will be over. But the West won't, because they don't want to lose face. Newsflash, you already have. And why should innocent lives be lost because some jackasses in the military, agencies and think tank groups decided stupidly to push Russia repeatedly in the vain hope of crushing them? It didn't and it won't work. The amazing backdrop to this interview is the mainly media silence. Another victory for common sense and Russia. Why? Because the truth is prevailing and the mouthpieces, the opinion manipulators of the media are now rapidly failing. Several lead media editors or presidents of media companies are about to receive the blueprint book themselves and a fairly stinging, to-the-point preface letter. The global time bomb is ticking on all the world's media, and when it finally goes, it will be a glorious day for the truth. Right, some medical news now. And here is another of the side effects of the, let's not forget, experimental vaccines people just sleepwalked into. A bit like the Poles, Hungarians and Jews getting on the concentration camp trains. But the COVID-19 vaccines is now being linked to unexplained vaginal bleeding in women without regular periods, according to a study published in Tuesday's Science Advances. And Christine Blix, the lead author from the Norwegian Institute of Public Health in Oslo, Norway, and their co-authors studied 21,000 national survey responses from postmenopausal and perimenopausal women, as well as premenopausal women without regular periods due to hormonal contraceptives. And of the whole group of women surveyed, over 10% experienced some form of unexplained vaginal bleeding, with over half of each group saying that the bleeding started in the 4 weeks after either dose of the 2-dose COVID-19 vaccine. Now, over 13% of premenopausal women experienced unexplained bleeding during a period of 8 to 9 months after the vaccine, with the risk of unexplained bleeding being 3 to 5 times higher than prior to the vaccination. Now, the risks for postmenopausal women increased by threefold. Unexplained bleeding during or after menopause is a possible indicator of endometrial cancer or other serious conditions such as vaginal or endometrial atrophy. Now, our findings of an increased risk across the reproductive stages raises the possibility that the mechanisms linking COVID-19 vaccination to unexpected vaginal bleeding may be similar across the stages, acknowledging that the study was unable to determine the causal mechanism of the association. Now, changes in menstruation due to COVID-19 vaccinations and infection have been anecdotally discussed and observed, but few scientific studies have confirmed the connection, with many attributing period changes or unexplained bleeding to stress and anxiety during the early stages of the pandemic. Now, in 2021, reproductive physician Victoria Mail published an article in the British Medical Journal calling for further investigation into the link between both COVID-19 infection or vaccination and changes in menstruation. That was 2021, citing more than 30,000 women in the United Kingdom alone who reported bleeding changes to their vaccine complications system. Menstrual changes have been reported after both mRNA and adenovirus vectored COVID-19 vaccines, suggesting that if there is a connection, it is likely to be the result of the immune response to vaccination rather than a specific vaccine component, Mail said at the time. But Mail also noted that other vaccines, such as that for the human papilloma virus, can trigger an immune response that has also been associated with menstrual changes. And so now the birthing issue is coming into question, after our book highlighted this ongoing childbirth and reduction program being run in mainly white countries. Now, the silver lining is, or one of them, people should learn now that all the organisations of life are and have been scheming against us. The fake trust factor will disappear, and that will then leave the people more open to the truth. A series of truths that are going to be very unpalatable for many to hear. This is an interesting article and will be noted by many members within the group, and in particular those connected with the village. At Scientific American, Lydia Denworth brought up an interesting topic earlier this month: the way that brainwaves synchronize between two people who are communicating successfully. Neurons in corresponding locations of different brains fire at the same time, creating matching patterns like dancers moving together. Auditory and visual areas respond to shape, sound and movement in similar ways, whereas higher order brain areas seem to behave similarly during much more challenging tasks, such as making meaning out of something that has been seen or heard. Now, the experience of being on the same wavelength as another person is real, and it is visible in the activity of the brain. For example, she tells us couples exhibit higher degrees of brain synchronicity than non-romantic pairs, as do close friends compared to more distant acquaintances. Now, there is a name for the study of such moments. It's called collective neuroscience. Now, synchrony is not a brand new discovery, but methods of tracking it, called hyperscanning, have become more innovative in the last decade. Personally, I disagree with that statement, as the agencies have been using this for many decades, along with remote viewing techniques. But the prospect of using synchrony to better track and understand success or failure in learning environments is attracting neuroscientists to the field. And one study, interestingly, in the Basque Research Centre, using electroencephalography EEG, reported that the rhythms of the brainwaves corresponding to the speaker and the listener adjust according to the physical properties of the sound of the verbal messages expressed in a conversation. And this then creates a connection between the two brains, which began to work together towards a common goal: communication. And this is telepathy at work, and has been demonstrated in the village and even further afield with members from Europe. Why is it considered only a possibility or another branch of pseudoscience, when in reality many people do it without recognising it? Just because all can't do it, or science tells us it's not possible, does not mean it is not real when it is. Now, for the purpose of the study, the Basque researchers used 15 dyads of people of the same sex, complete strangers to each other, separated by a folding screen. And this ensured that the connection generated was truly thanks to the communication established. Now, following a script, the dyads held a general conversation and took turns playing the role of speaker and listener. Now, there is some evidence that synchrony makes people more willing to help each other. And according to a 2017 study, people tend to be more pro-social after synchronizing behaviours with others, yet the underlying neural mechanisms are rarely known. But how can it be unknown when it's simply related to waves and frequency, which along with energy are the three components of everything? And what this is stating really, and people won't think of it in these terms, the people are the Wi-Fi. And it's yet another example of an internal technology we have being replicated with an external technology, the phone. Now, in this study, participant dyads performed either a coordination task or an independence task, with their brain activations recorded via the functional near-infrared spectroscopy hyperscanning technique. Now, participant dyads in the coordination group showed higher synchronized behaviors and greater subsequent inclination to help each other than those in the independence group, indicating the pro-social effect of interpersonal synchrony. Interesting stuff. Last medical piece, the US has announced sanctions on 25 China-based firms and individuals allegedly involved in the production of chemicals used to make fentanyl. And one does hope that this is an actual crackdown on the drug and not just some lame attempt to protect the market of it for the agencies here at home. Yes, all the agencies run the drugs market. Now, fentanyl, a potent opioid used as a painkiller or sedative, plays a major role in the US drug crisis. And the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, said the drug supply chain often starts with chemical companies in China, which will be the case. But what about the chemical companies in America or the military chemical warfare factories here as well, like Fort Detrick and many others? And China criticised the imposition of sanctions, saying the fentanyl crisis was rooted in the United States itself. And we firmly oppose the United States sanctions and prosecutions against Chinese entities and individuals and the severe infringements of lawful rights and interests of the relevant enterprises and persons, according to the Chinese Foreign Ministry. But the Chinese government, they say, has been strictly cracking down on drug crimes, and we deplore the harshest control on precursor chemicals. Imposing pressure and sanctions cannot solve the United States' own problems. Now, I think we had a story maybe 12, 18 months ago about the Chinese government was rounding up all the drug gangs. And they said it will only create obstacles in the China-US cooperation on drug control. And in April, a spokesman for the Chinese Foreign Ministry said there was no such thing as illegal trafficking of fentanyl between China and Mexico. And this came after the Mexican President Andres Manuel López Obrador called on the Chinese government to help stop the alleged flow of fentanyl and its precursors into the country. Now, the US authorities blame Mexican drug gangs for supplying fentanyl to users across the US. Two things wrong with that statement. Then why are they allowing these people to cross the border illegally? Is one. And the gangs in Mexico were supplied and funded by the CIA again. And so where is the crackdown on them? Everybody knows it. So you really want to stop drug production and sales, then you just have to knock on Langley's door. Now, fentanyl can be legally prescribed by doctors, but a dramatic increase in opioid addiction in the US in recent decades has led to a rise in illegal production and overdoses. In 2022 alone, the drug was linked to a record 109,680 deaths. Near 110,000 deaths due to mind control programs to make the public docile and line the pockets of the shekel makers at the agency-based private contractors. Society news. Two pieces, one from England and one from Ireland, to complete this section today. And concerns are being raised in both countries. And another example of our warnings that countries themselves are finished was posted in the Telegraph recently and said this: Britain's decline over the past 25 years has been staggeringly rapid. Almost everything is getting worse and almost nothing is getting better. Now, that was first dated in 2013, but why has it taken so long to recognise it? Has it ever worked is the greater question. And it says our public and private institutions are broken, presided over by an incompetent, selfish and narcissistic ruling class. There's that second reference to ruling class, that's what Putin mentioned as well. And so it's rather interesting they're now pointing fingers at the ruling class, given every media outlet slammed and labelled those of us who saw it all decades ago. Living standards, when adjusted properly for living and property costs, are declining, they said. Well, they've been declining since World War II and perhaps longer. And then he said this classic line. I wonder where we've heard this before. Even the simplest things don't work any longer. No shit, Sherlock. Queuing, scarcity and congestion are rife. Our infrastructure is embarrassingly poor. The honest and hard-working face endless bureaucratic battles to obtain what they are due. Free-riding, crime, disorder, fraud, littering and generalised rule-bending are rife and all too often tolerated by an apathetic citizen and an indifferent state. But free-riding, crime, disorder, fraud, littering and rule-bending. I thought they were talking about the police and the government. Perhaps I was right. Britain's residual virtues are individualism, independence of mind, tolerance and openness. Uniquely appealing features of our national character are fading. Maybe because it's been diluted by different cultures. Well, like a frog in boiling water, few saw the full scale of the decline coming until it was too late, and those who did were ridiculed by the bien pensant. Not more so than the media itself, perpetuating lies of how great the economy is, ignoring social issues and pandering to rampant criminals masquerading as the ruling class. And yet the Telegraph says even in 2024, when millions now realise that Britain is on the wrong track, there is no hope of meaningful improvement. Well, we at THI disagree, because the blueprint provides all the improvements. They went on and said the Tories have been abysmal, but Labour will be even worse. Keir Starmer, who's Jewish, will double down on the social democratic and culturally nihilistic policies tested to destruction by the Conservatives. Well, of course so, because Starmer is a Jewish puppet like Zelensky, Blinken and many others. And what makes people think that they will achieve anything beneficial for the country or the people? Have they ever done anything beneficial to us before? No. In the 2000s, Britain had a particular idea of itself, a country of post-Thatcherite property owners which reconciled modernity and tradition, globalisation and national self-determination, low-tax dynamism and fairness, where you didn't need IDs to vote, where MPs weren't attacked by screaming mobs, and where finally racism was increasingly a thing of the past. Delusional thinking on all levels. property owners were lured in with low rates, remember, and then hit with high rates and often lost their homes, all of which is a scam. And the media talking about racism. Seriously. It is they who perpetuated it with their divisive rhetoric. And they said, we saw ourselves as socially mobile, law-abiding land of high trust. Interesting term. Low corruption, the rule of law, improving race relations and religious toleration. A uniquely open society and a model to the Western world. Turn it in. There's not a single country operating in the right way for the people, least of all Britain. Why? Because journalists became agency-based puppets and wouldn't report nothing of value, only peddle lies to give the illusion of that everything was fine and dandy. Well, such a vision is now largely obsolete. They said an Englishman's home was his castle, making a huge difference to our national psyche until our deliberate policy of rationing new houses at a time of mass immigration that robbed the under 40s of the chance of owning anything of their own. Yep, all done by the bankers, just as we conspiracy theorists stated. But this is a free country, they said. We used to maintain when presented with another idiotic proposal to control us, but that too is over. Killed off by the woke war on free speech, the jailing of Christian preachers, the sugar tax, the surveillance society and the COVID lockdowns. In narrow GDP growth terms, we continue to outperform the true laggards on the continent, as Brexiteers correctly predicted, but that should be no consolation. Our manufacturing sector is being priced out of global markets by the rush to net zero. Our energy policy is a hideous farce. Our misregulated city is in decline, and our tax system has an absurd conspiracy against hard workers and merit, with marginal tax rates back at 1970 levels for some people. The Socialist National Health Service, despite massive increases in funding, is a horror show and one of the main reasons not to live in the UK anymore. Some 5.6 million adults are on out-of-work benefits, and yet immigration is running at extraordinary levels. Our armed forces have been slashed and are now being subject to a woke takeover. All good stuff and points, and in alignment with what we told the generals and MI5, MI6 between 5 and 7 years ago. But it's nice to see for once they're actually now seeing the problems. But it's still filled with illusion and deluded thinking, all to avoid stating the captain obvious. Why? Because that is a truth too far currently. Even Putin and McGregor dance round the so-called Jewish issue. And they have to be diplomatic, of course, at this time, but eventually the band-aid has to come off. Now, predictably, all that was just said with that Telegraph article then led into another piece. And predictably, the report went on to the Jewish pity party and how only they are in fear, all of which is another sign of their desperation to keep the public in check. Guess what? It's not working and won't be ever again. So from Britain we go to Ireland, and here is another of the increasing articles now coming out in the mainstream whereby people are really starting to see the issues. And things are changing anyway in this country after certain energy and frequency work was done in this country last year. It's bringing in a sea of change that, whilst brutal to hear, it has to unfold for the real transition to take place. But this is a story by Ruth Dudley Edwards called "Ireland is Fast Becoming Europe's Nastiest Nation." Now, typically the article is steered towards supporting one group, all too familiar to THI. But amongst the desperate defence of such lies an undercurrent of people who are not tolerating the lies anymore. And she said, "Ireland, which loves to be loved, is seeing its reputation transformed into one defined by a sullen, mean-spirited pettiness. Every week we seem to witness yet another example of the ugliness that is fast taking over public life in the country, in which innocent bystanders are forced to take sides on a purely political matter." And she then referenced about a women's basketball match in Latvia. And like so many other sports teams in Ireland, and like other apolitical targets of the sinister boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, which is against Israel, the basketball team had come under heavy pressure from Irish Sport for Palestine to boycott fixtures against Israel. But for the Irish team, this was a vital Eurobasket qualifier, and had they boycotted it, they'd effectively been banned from competition for the next 5 years. And so some players chose not to travel. But then a member of the Israeli team said in an interview that the Irish side were quite anti-Semitic, and it's no secret. Cue absolute outrage from Irish commentators, and the Irish team decided not to partake in pre-match arrangements like exchanging gifts and formal handshakes. And so the game was played behind closed doors. But it's a telling incident, she said. The Emerald Isle has built its tourism industry on visions of friendly, welcoming citizens. The reality is a country that is becoming increasingly nasty. I'm not seeing it. But this is how the narrative is steered when you insert Israel into anything. That suddenly everything else is wrong and Israel is all hunky-dory. Not. Now, the author said, "I disagree with my countrymen on many issues, because many are congenital virtual signallers who love to support the popular easy side of any controversy. And I disagree with her, as what about the support for the IRA? Wasn't that a truly nasty example of virtue signalling? And what about the virtue signalling in support of the Catholic Church, despite them committing many heinous acts against the children? And the same applies in the convents also, with the Sisters of Death and Nastiness cult. Why is everything only an issue because of Israel and its fake history, fake book and fake country? The conflict between Israel and Palestine is a perfect example, she said. But what's that got to do with Ireland? You know? Fueled by rampant Republican anti-Semitism over the years, what had been a low-key distrust of Israel in parties such as Sinn Féin seems to have turned to hatred. Well, that was inevitable, wasn't it? We did warn of it. That Israel's time is on countdown. People are just not putting up with it anymore. And the hatred is what the Irish Republican leadership excels at spreading, whether it takes the form of terrorism, as in the past, or the propaganda they still devise and popularise so brilliantly. They have long attempted to identify their cause with others who similarly claim to be freedom-fighting victims of oppression. But the role of these carefully selected oppressed groups, Palestinians, South Americans, or whoever else comes in the handy pursuit of power in Ireland, is purely to follow slavishly the Republican script. Carefully selected oppressed groups like Palestinians, freedom fighters. She seems to forget the Irish supporting their own version of so-called freedom fighters, the IRA. And what revisionism is going on here? And the audacity to forget their own virtue signalling, because somehow that is all different. But try telling that to the children who died at the blood-stained hands of IRA bombers in Warrington and Manchester, plus many other regions. And she said sometimes this leads to bleakly amusing scenes. She said, I had to laugh when I saw the Palestinian activists were apparently ejected from a Solidarity Rally for Palestine event in Belfast on Wednesday night because they were noisily demanding that Sinn Féin boycott the White House on St. Patrick's Day. She said, if you ride two horses, you are liable to fall off, and it's not just Sinn Féin. And perhaps nowhere is modern Ireland's new character better summarised than the current Taoiseach, Lee Varadkar. When he's not calling for a ceasefire, she said, or carefully avoiding the mention of why an Irish Israeli girl was missing, the answer she had been kidnapped by brutal terrorists. So calling for children not to be blown up, removed from their homes and families killed in large numbers is now deemed not a valid thing to do, according to Ms. Edwards. And what a delusional, forgetful and pathetic individual she is. And yet again, showing an interest because of an alleged Irish Israeli girl is missing, and that somehow that is more important than the near 12,000 Palestinian children being murdered by the real terrorists. 1 or 12,000. Varadkar, she says, is also cozying up to China, insisting that Dublin's position is that the small democracy of Taiwan is part of China. Again, she needs to learn history, not listen to the BBC, RTE or Sky News. But it's an odd position for an Irish politician to hold, given the country's own history with Britain, but fully in keeping with how pressure from republicanism is corrupting politics. And again, Miss Edwards needs to learn true history, not the BS the Irish people have been constantly fed for many centuries. But what happens when she finds out that Britain has been run for centuries by the people with the same religion as she's protecting in this piece? Of course, some things don't change, she said. The Irish government spent the last few years taking cheap shot after cheap shot at the UK over Brexit, over Northern Ireland, over the Troubles, and frankly over anything else you care to name. Anglophobia is always a winning card for Irish politicians, an inflaming dislike of their neighbours, a small price to pay for those precious Republican votes. Ireland's reputation as a friendly, good-natured country is going up in smoke, and if things carry on this way, it will soon be gone for good. The problem is Irish history is riddled like America with utter drivel, overlays and revisionism that leaves it so far removed from reality. The future of Ireland will be a lot brighter, but not until some real harsh truths is spat out in droves about who was really responsible for the rapid decay of a former Rus land. Right, we're going to go into an expose now, and it's fairly brutal, but these things have to be brought to light. And with Ukraine back in the news, courtesy of the Putin-Carlson interview of sorts, brought up the history of it and some of the reasoning behind Russia targeting there. And so it's time for an update with this report as to what is really going on there recently and in some instances currently, although it is much reduced since the Russian intervention. This report goes deeper into what Putin could say and or who is behind it, as he masked the culprit under the banner of Nazi evil spirits. Now we at CHI know who is behind it, of course, and because I do not have to be as diplomatic as those in the public eye, will rightly call it out as it is. But it's another sordid and horrible tale the media of most nations are covering up, which indicates who runs them. Every newsreader is soaked in the blood, fear, death, harvesting and traumas of these children, not just in Ukraine, but globally, by their refusal to speak the truth. The author said, when I began investigating the kidnapping of children in Artyomovsk in Ukraine, I had no idea of the extent to which I would uncover trafficking on an international scale and the sordid methods used to supply children to paedophile networks and organ traffickers. Now in April 2023, he interviewed a refugee from Artyomovsk called Yulia, who told me that as well as having mined and blown up their building, Ukrainian units called Phoenix and White Angels were kidnapping children in the town. Now Phoenix, of course, brings in Project Phoenix, a dastardly CIA program of torture and abuse. And the White Angels is a new term, but again has CIA memes running through it, as the former names White Hats and Helmets has their blood-soaked fingers written all over it. White Angels can also be seen as the Royal Draco as well, hence the term CIA cars. But notice they use the term white a lot and yet operate in an evil manner, which runs alongside how the media portrays the whites as well. Why? Because the CIA runs the American media as well. And this information immediately caught my attention, and he decided to investigate further to find out why Kiev was taking children away from their parents in this way. And said, on the very day I was conducting this interview, Russian colleagues were interviewing a little girl from Artyomovsk, whom the White Angels had tried to kidnap from her grandparents, claiming that her mother was dead and that they were to take her to Germany. And it was clear to me, he said, that these children kidnapped in Ukraine, in Donbass, were then sent abroad for all sorts of sordid trafficking, from organ trafficking to paedophile rings. Now, because the inhabitants of Donbass have never been able to assert their rights in the face of war crimes committed against them by Ukraine since 2014 within the international justice bodies, because Kiev enjoys total immunity at the ICC and the ECHR with regards to the crimes it may commit against the children of the region. Total immunity. Now, a few days later, other refugees from Artyomovsk confirmed the child abductions, and I discovered that the same methods were being used in other towns such as Avdiivka. Now, similar information is coming in from Kupiansk. Now, the last refugee we interviewed, Katia, confirmed the abduction of children by the White Angels, then explained that when the parents of abducted children called them to find out where they were, they claimed not to know anything about it. And Katia also told us that before the Battle of Artyomovsk, they had seen organisations like the White Angels in the town. And these child abduction units only appeared once the fighting had started. And in other words, once the city was in a state of general chaos and the inhabitants could no longer turn to the courts to assert their parental rights. And yet again another example of their order out of the chaos, which is an ideal situation for traffickers of all kinds. Now, their modus operandi was revealed at the 27th of July 2023 conference on Ukraine's crimes against the children of Donbass, held in the DPR, or the Donetsk People's Republic. A woman, Lilia, and her daughter, Kira, gave evidence of how at the start of the special military operation, around 10 children were taken from a school in Chichatsi. I don't think I've pronounced that right, but that's the best I can do. Which is then under the Ukrainian control, or the LPR, Lugansk People's Republic, over to Western Ukraine by the headmistress of the school. The headmistress of the school transported the children for these White Angels, apparently under orders from Kiev and without informing their parents. The children were then forbidden to call their parents to tell them where they were. And that is something that has been replicated in schools in America, about the COVID jabs, remember, and also their propaganda and woke programs. You see how it all unfolds, and you now see why the whole school system needs to be temporarily closed and a whole new curriculum put in place to eliminate these agents against we the people. I have outed many professions involved in operating against we the people, and this adds teachers into the mix as well, whether knowingly or not. And all too often people do what they are told, despite knowing it was wrong. Well, enough of that shit. But Kira happened to know her mother's telephone number by heart, and managed to call her to let her know that they were in Lvov and then Khust. Now, thanks to Lilia's determination to find her daughter after she went to look for her in Western Ukraine, we discovered how Kiev exports the children it abducts. The children taken from the school in Chichatsi had been taken away without any identity documents. They were not yet old enough to have passports, and their birth certificates were with their parents. When she got her daughter back, Lilia discovered that they had produced a new original birth certificate for Kira, who had been declared an orphan, even though her mother is alive and well. And according to Kira, the group of children with the new documents were to be sent to Poland. Now, Poland is rapidly becoming a den of iniquity and is destabilising the whole of Europe with their alignments with the old order groups and organisations. Yet didn't Putin warn and inform us of Poland's chicanery that led to the start of World War II? So perhaps we should not be surprised. Now, without the perseverance of Kira and her mother, no one would have known where and how the children had been taken. And this is how Ukraine makes the children it abducts disappear, preventing anyone from finding out what happens to them. The parents are not informed of anything, the children are forbidden to contact them, and then they are given false papers. And that's the best way to describe it, given it's impossible for the authorities to produce an original birth certificate when it's in the hands of the parents, and to be declared orphans before being sent abroad. This is what happens in England with the secret child or children's courts, where no legal representation is allowed to take place, and the parents who had their children taken cannot attend the court either. The organisations involved in that scam and theft in children in the UK are the police, social services, child protection, lawyers and judges. And these sectors, along with teachers, politicians, news media and medical people, will never be trusted again once all the truth emerges. It is, and it will, and also why we need a full 180 of every organisation and group. And there was other children that went missing in Nikolaevka, who were taken to a holiday camp allegedly to shelter them, but whose parents now have no news of them. But why use such illegal methods if the real aim is to simply shelter these children from the war? Well, because there's nothing legal about the real aim. Now, at the conference, Vasily Prozorov, a former employee of the SBU, the Ukrainian intelligence services, explained that one of his investigations had revealed that some of the children abducted by Ukraine are sent to pedophile networks in Great Britain via a whole network of Ukrainian and British officials or former officials who all work together. And at the heart of it all is one man, Sergei Borisov, a former SBU agent who was arrested in 2020 for kidnapping entrepreneurs for ransom. Yet, strangely enough, he and his entire gang were released on bail in 2021, and here he is again trafficking Ukrainian children to the UK. Now, on the British side, members of MI6 and the Foreign Office are also involved. So why was Borisov allowed bail to continue? Because he is leveraged. And so now he has no option but to dance for the dark forces. And intelligence services have a lot to answer for in the near future. And I suspect, like other organisations, it will be deemed as a pariah going forward that no one will trust. And that's why that has to be stripped and started again with better people. But this is hardly surprising when you remember that in recent years there have been several scandals involving networks exploiting children in Great Britain, plus the pedophiles in the British establishment, such as Jimmy Savile, whose crimes were covered up for years. Now, I happen to know a fair bit about that particular investigation. I was given all the details back in 2014. But Savile and many other so-called entertainers in the BBC were investigated by Scotland Yard in the late 1980s, early 1990s. I was aware of it then, but I got more of the details. And the investigation stopped into that the pedophiles in the BBC and many other places because it reached into Buckingham Palace and the royals and was subsequently shut down. That is why Jimmy Savile was allowed to continue. And people in Scotland Yard have the fear, trauma and death of the children abused after that on their hands. The future has to entail the golden rule and Rita law, so that no one is ever above the law again, and all are equals within it. Now in 2021, the UK's National Crime Agency stated that there would be between 550 and 850,000 pedophiles in Britain alone. Many of them are leveraged, I would say, where curiosity was taken over by the dark forces. Or maybe I'm just wrong, and there are that many pedophiles, which is a sad statistic. And so, sending Ukraine children, in other words, to Britain, there's no shortage of customers, including very high-ranking people for the pedophile rings that kidnap these children in Ukraine. Another investigation carried out by Vasily Prozorov revealed that several organisations registered in EU countries are also involved in exporting children from Ukraine under the pretext of providing them with shelter. And these organisations take unaccompanied Ukrainian children out of Ukraine, and what happens to them afterwards is unknown. However, as early as 2022, several Western media, including Deutsche Welle and The Guardian, reported that Ukrainian children evacuated abroad had all disappeared. And it's not only in the UK that Ukrainian children are at risk of falling into the hands of pedophile rings. In May 2023, a 52-year-old Ukrainian refugee was arrested in Poznan, Poland, for renting out children in her care to pedophiles. She adopted 10 children between the ages of 4 and 16 and then rented them out for sex. The adoption agencies all need to be heavily investigated globally, as this is not just a Ukraine problem. And investigators discovered that the woman rented out the children to pedophiles in the Ukraine and Poland. Worse still, while the clients were abusing the children, she stood next to them to make sure they kept to the time limit, as the sessions were only allowed to last 20 minutes. The Daily Mail report revealed that she tortured and sexually abused the children herself also. In April 22, a group of around 30 Ukrainian children disappeared in Spain on their way to the Canary Islands. And that same month, an investigation was opened in Lithuania into potential child trafficking at a private Ukrainian orphanage, Perlinka, from which 43 children have been evacuated to the Baltic country. Several of the children, including girls, had complained of threats to send them to work in brothels, or that there were plans to send them to other countries, including the United States. Now, when Ukraine demanded the return of these children, several sought asylum in Lithuania for fear of reprisals or being sent to who knows where. But paedophile networks are not the only threat hanging over Ukrainian children. In June 2023, a man was arrested in Transcarpathia while trying to take a baby to Slovakia. The man had bought the baby from its mother and was planning to sell it to organ traffickers. He had already sold and transported at least 300 children in this way. Babies for shekels? Is nothing sacred anymore on this planet? And for those who may think that this is Russian disinformation, think again. Even the Ukrainian press and the UK Daily Mail have reported on this affair. And as further confirm of the veracity of these claims, this article was also shared by the Russian embassy in London. The disappearances of Ukrainian children used for their organs are nothing new, sadly. In 2005, a journalist from the Globe and Mail wrote an article condemning the discovery in Kharkov of a mass grave containing the bodies of babies and fetuses without their vital organs. Mothers complained that hospital staff had taken their babies at the moment of birth and then returned later to tell them that they had supposedly been stillborn, which is a very practical method of fueling child trafficking. But hospitals would never do that, would cry the masses. Wrong thinking. Since December 21, organ trafficking in Ukraine has been facilitated by the passing of a law that abolished the obligation to have the organ removal authorization signed by the donor, his parents or his legal representative, authenticated by a notary. Wow. And no one thought to question that or asked as to why that law was needed or even allowed. And the pattern then becomes very clear. Children are abducted, provided with the new original documents and declared orphans, so that then they can be placed under state guardianship or adopted by who knows who. And these new guardians can then sign an organ harvesting authorization, which no longer needs to be authenticated by a notary, and the deal is done. And in the light of all this information, it's high time that the international organisations for the protection of human rights, and especially children's rights, seriously investigated the abductions of children in Ukraine, plus the sordid trafficking, organ trafficking or paedophile networks of which they are the victims. And it's also time for people in the West to open their eyes to what is really happening in Ukraine, with the active complicity of the country's authorities in terms of child trafficking. Officials in Ukraine are making money by selling children to Western paedophile networks and organ traffickers, thanks to the ongoing conflict. And this is how Ukraine repays its debt to the Western countries that supply it with arms and funding. By selling the children it steals from Donbass and other regions where the fighting is taking place for their organs or to satisfy the fantasies of high-ranking pedocriminals. So you wish to know why Russia went into Ukraine? And yes, it's all about the territory, they will say. Yes, it's about stopping the West or NATO. But the next example is the main reason, along with shutting down the chemical labs and stopping the neo-Nazis slaughtering Ukrainians and Russians. And this is why all people should support Russia. Listen to this. Citing one example, prosecutor Aneta Kamizhnitska-Penkala told the court, together and in agreement with unidentified men, making it a permanent source of income, she handed over a minor to them in order to force her to have sexual intercourse. They held her by her hair and raped her, while Svetlana stood in the doorway with the phone in her hand and counted the time. She counted if 20 minutes had passed, as these men had paid for those 20 minutes. The children said, "Mum didn't save us." A child psychiatrist added that when she interviewed the children, they were scared. They sat with their hands on their knees, heads down, no eye contact. They were very pale and very emaciated. The 5-year-old weighed 11 kilograms, roughly 24 pounds. The condition of the teeth was bad. I've never seen such decay. This was not negligence that arose in a few weeks. The House of Horrors was revealed after the doctor was called to treat one of the children suffering from stomach problems. The doctor said that night she began to talk about the violence that Svetlana had used. I've never seen such a child, eyes fixed on one point, tears dripping down her face, and she talked and talked. She was pouring out the information. She finished one topic and started another. The next day, more children started talking. Now, Plyushko, who faces up to 15 years in jail if found guilty, said that before Russia's invasion, she had been running a foster home in Ukraine for 15 years. She faces just up to 15 years in jail. Where's the rest of the sentence? As these children face a lifetime sentence of being haunted by those events. And then she added, well, there's never been any complaints before, and then denied all the charges. But she told the court, maybe I hurt them because I didn't surround them with love and care. Or maybe you are just an evil psychopath, trading a child's innocence for shekels. And it's a harrowing story that makes all Western media complicit in it. But the people's reluctance to take any notice of events outside their own bubble also must be brought into question, looked at and fixed. The organisations involved in this should alarm everyone who's new to THI. It runs through virtually every department or branch of government and the services. Military, agencies, schools, passport offices, hospitals, child services, government and others. All said to serve and protect the people. They never have. That is the reality. Right. They're never much fun reading them out. But every time we put it out, it reduces the energy. You have to understand it in terms of energy. Babies are energy. We are energy. and it takes it away. And there's been giant strides about defending children around the world. That must not be forgotten. But this is ongoing currently in the Ukraine. And so now you're beginning to see why these wars unfold and why Russia had no option but to go in. This was happening in 2014. I was reporting, I had a reporter live on the ground in Ukraine telling me they're genociding their own people. 8 million. And it's still going on. Putin spoke of a coup in 2014 with fake elections yet again ran by the CIA. Those three letters comes up far too many times for anybody's liking. They're involved in all the nastiness. And how anyone could admit being an ex-CIA is beyond me at this point. But if you are ex-CIA, come and help us fix this problem. Or NSA, or DHS, or the several other clown organisations of agencies. Let's get together and fix this once and for all. An interesting time. This is Mystery Section 1. There are 2 tonight. For the UFO community is as the reporting of events ramps up in the mainstream media. One must ask, why now? Well, the truth is coming to the fore for one, and two, they are often used as distraction pieces. But that will also have a caveat as well, as what if those distraction pieces reaches a threshold and it goes viral? And suddenly non-believers are on board and suddenly begin to realise the government and the media have been lying to them all the time. A secretive, here we go again, CIA office has been coordinating the retrieval of crashed UFOs around the world for decades, multiple sources told the Daily Mail. And one source said that at least 9 apparent non-human craft have been recovered by the US government, some wrecked from a crash, but there is 2 completely intact. And 3 sources briefed on those alleged top-secret operations said that the Office of Global Access, OGA, which is a wing of the CIA's Science and Technology Directorate, has played a central role since 2003 in orchestrating the collection of what is described as alien spacecraft. They lie. They were involved from their inception since 1947, as our shows called The Events That Changed the World's Part 1 through 3 revealed. That is why that clown group was created. They were working with the Majestic 12, remember? Now, the 3 sources who spoke on condition of anonymity to avoid reprisals have all been briefed by individuals involved in those alleged UFO retrieval missions. Now, though the shocking claim sounds like they come from a science fiction novel, the article said, they are part of a growing body of evidence suggesting the US government could indeed be hiding advanced vehicles that were not made by humans. Now, the Office of Global Access, a wing of the CIA, has played a central role in collecting alien spacecraft since 2003. 1947-48. And former top intelligence officer David Grush told Congress as much in an explosive public hearing in July. The same month, Senator Majority Leader Chuck Schumer sponsored an extraordinary bill to allow disclosure of recovered technologies of unknown origin and biological evidence of non-human intelligence, which has now been passed in the Senate. And sources who spoke to shed light on how the CIA has allegedly coordinated the secret recovery and storage of these alleged craft or landed UFOs. There are at least 9 vehicles. There were different circumstances for different ones, and it has to do with the physical condition they're in. If it crashes, there's a lot of damage done. Others, 2 of them, though, are completely intact. Pretty much like the Aztec one. Now, the sources said the CIA has a system in place that can discern UFOs while they're still cloaked. Some of us can just use your eyes. And that if the non-human craft land crashed or are brought down to Earth, then special military units are sent to try to salvage the wreckage. Another source with knowledge of the OGA's role said that they specialise in allowing the US military to secretly access areas around the world where they would usually be denied, for example behind enemy lines. And they are basically a facilitator for people to get in and out of countries. And they are very clever at being able to get anywhere in the world they want. So the US military is involved again and covering up with lies. We're paying for this shit, you know. All of it. But who wrote this contract agreement up that the US military can go anywhere in the world and retrieve these craft? And why has every government agreed to it? And also, why were the people not told? But if only the military were just as proficient in delivering humanitarian aid as our blueprint tasked them to do. Now, most of OGA's operations involve more conventional retrieval missions, such as stray nuclear weapons, which hasn't been used since 1967, yet I digress, down satellites, and other adversaries' technologies. But they claim some missions coordinated by the OGA have involved retrieval of UFOs, and the task at hand is simply to get it into custody and protect the secrecy of it, one source said. Again, one must ask as to why that is the case. Why do they feel the need to cover it up? And the 2 great questions are the actual craft theirs? And is the US military and the CIA ran by the owners of these craft? The actual physical retrieval is by the military, but it's not kept under military control because they have to keep too many records. And so they start moving it out fairly quickly into private hands. But who are these private hands? And why do they have the ultimate in cloaking themselves? Is the private hands the private contractors of the CIA? And if yes, who are these people? Are they people as we know it at all? One must ask that question. Now, documents published by the National Archives and Records Administration in December 2016 showed that the OGA was one of 56 officers in the CIA. 56 officers. with its chief and deputies making up a total of 286 director-level officials in the spy agency. What a waste of public money that is. And they all must go with an agency revamp. An unclassified organisational chart published by the CIA in October 2015 lists the OGA among 9 officers in the science and technology wing of the agency. And you all thought they were a spying agency and protecting your country. Turn it in. They are a secret organisation that wields and receives way too much power for clandestine operations with zero oversight, all of which we pay for. Now, the late CIA expert Jeffrey Richardson wrote in a 2016 book on the agency that the OGA was established in 2003 and cited a CIA description that it integrates analysis, technology and tradecraft to attack the most difficult targets and to provide worldwide collection capability. Again, the American people have to pay for all of this. And in overview, it seems the US and its apparatus and functions are all designated against we the people. And this type of power over us all must stop for the planet and its varied races to prosper. What have they got to hide? I'm not sure how many people are ready to hear that. But ultimately the truth will prevail, and those organisations will be added to an increasing list now of never to be trusted again. This is our members pondering, and something we all could take some time to ponder over. He said, when I go to bed at night, I often have a hard time trying to fall to sleep. I most often have the thought and the feeling that I could have achieved more during the day than I did. Doing too much, doing too little, doing it wrong, omitting things. Well, that's just for one day. But what about a lifetime? Personally, I am very satisfied with that and that which I have done during this lifetime. And this is because I've never been content with the achievements of any single day of my life. I always want more, better, contributing to the more wholeness of this planet. And this wholeness is a holy goal to me, contributing in all directions to my own and others' spiritual awareness, to the health of my own and others' bodies, to my family's happiness, to the village prosperity, to my government's ethics and to my country's technologies, to peace amongst nations and amongst countries. Being faithful to this goal of wholeness is my code of honour. Integrity to me is when I, as a being, can feel my achievements towards my and to me, the holy wholeness. To be able to speak to myself in truth with my honour intact. At the end of the day, telling myself that this day I achieved just that, the giant goal, and I feel my integrity raise up to the heaven where it should be. My pillow will witness that a head is resting upon it in total bliss and happiness. A great introspective thinking piece that all should practice. In particular to remembering your achievements of the day instead of your failures. Here's another example of the lunatic asylum. The moon of Saturn which resembles the Death Star of Star Wars, now has been found to have a warm, hidden ocean which could possess life, according to astronomers. Well, I never. And what about the compartments and the engine drive within that Death Star? Now, Mimas, around 250 miles across in size, was thought to be a lifeless solid object with a surface layer of pockmarked ice. But scientists now suggest it orbits Saturn and moves in a way best described as the presence of a large volume of liquid water. And like our moon, it maintains a constant orbit and only faces one side of the planet, all of which means it's not a natural moon or satellite. Now, it is thought that the moon has an ocean that is about 40 miles deep under an icy crust which is around 15 miles thick. And astronomers claim the water could reach 30 centigrade, which is an ideal temperature that might sustain life. Well, if it's 30 centigrade below, what is heating it? Did they ask that question? No. And Mimas will become part of a collection of ocean worlds if the analysis is correct, including Jupiter's moon Europa and Enceladus, both of which are not natural satellites either. Now, Dr. Valerie Laney of the Observatoire de Paris PSL, who led the research, said it is a very unlikely place to find habitable water. There is water all over the universe. It is the building blocks of life. And it's quite extraordinary at this stage of so-called development, they're still searching for water. McFly! Here's an odd pondering for you upon watching a rather curious alien TV program. It was on the television's TV, not on the cable per se, which is rather odd, and it's very deep in what it reveals. And it highlights all the beings people here have engaged. And I noted the stance of many, having also noticed how many people walk. Front walkers, I labelled one group as their knees are bent forward and they walk with a bounce. Now, others often have very spindly legs that are almost grey-like in appearance. And then I pondered on the cloven-footed race and relayed it to the wearing of high-heeled shoes. It never made sense to me as a child as to why women had to wear high-heeled shoes. That, yes, can make them taller. But another question that pondered me is, how can 5 toes fit into a narrowing space coming to a point? And so then he asked the question, was women's high-heeled shoes invented for the cloven-footed beings who only have 2 to 3 toes? And the high heels would cover up the fact that their heel is off the ground when walking, and the high heel of the shoes would cover up the fact they were cloven-footed. Klingons originated on Uranus, just saying. This next piece is an addition to the thoughts of being paid within the blueprint work. And I spoke about how we're all being paid by unseen methods, a gift of life force from the cosmos. And the problem is people have danced in the external for too long and have forgotten the internal effects. But the act of giving is receiving as well in overview, but again in unseen effects as they are internal. To give is a soul level thing. It is caring, sharing and compassionate. But society has created a system whereby if we give, we feel we have to receive something back from the receiver. And this is wrong thinking on our part, as that is a two-way payback system. But paying it forward, though, can create a multi-exchange system, which ultimately has a clockwise flow, and so all are touched by it. The current money system is a payback with interest scheme, which is harvesting and anti-clockwise, and so it doesn't touch us all. And so as you give, you also receive in non-physical terms, not necessarily the physical terms or ways. And it's all about the overview and perspective again. Here is a deeper pondering that will no doubt raise furrowed foreheads again. So many of our THI members on Zooms are moving their hands and fingers to smooth out their foreheads these days. I see you. And I get there's lots of, oh my God, I do that all the time, you cry. And maybe now you know why. I guess I'll get the blame for that as well. Self-sacrifice and service to others questions came up recently on a Zoom, and I've covered in recent shows of why we all need to become service to others, not selfish and just serving the self. And it is ironic in overview of how a discipline within that is beneficial to the self is largely ignored by many people. Shadow and inner work is an individual pursuit that gets people to help them on a wider scale. And yet the pursuit of a better world and service to others generates the opposite and is only more service to self. But this is something that I've been pondering on. What if the atrocities ongoing now, including the COVID sham, has created a unique situation and opportunity? And the great questions are people self-sacrificing themselves for the greater good to allow the people to finally see through the illusion? What if the Gazans are self-sacrificing to expose the Israeli problem? What if the Ukrainians and Russians are self-sacrificing to also expose the Jewish elite problem and the pedophiles? What if the masses are staying asleep so the rest of us can see the difference and elevate ourselves? What if the masses have already ascended and they are avatars in this world to help us? What if the dark souls are self-sacrificing themselves for the light to ascend? What if the religious constructs and people within are self-sacrificing themselves to get people to become adults and not remain the child tied to the church cult? A case of looking at life from both sides now, it seems. The word spiritual is often bandied about these days, and one wonders how many truly understand it. You will not gain it by paying for expensive retreats with what are largely gurus and or snake oil salesmen. You will not gain it by and large with a shaman either, given most have had less than a year's training. But how can you train to be spiritual? It is an inner process that is different for us all. And in overview, the spiritual path, mired in the Love and Light Brigade, became no better than the religions. And the difference between spiritual and religion are as follows. One is internal and one is external. One generates growth, the other leads you to being harvested. One is an individual pursuit, the other is done in masses. One is generating life force energy and the other is siphoning it. Here's another pondering of mine called the balloon story of life. We have a saying about certain people back in England, the sad balloon people, as they're always saying someone has let them down. But life and people will always let you down if you place ultimate trust in the wrong things and people. The media, the government, the medical people, none of whom have been vetted for you to then make or pass a judgment upon them of whether they are beneficial to you or not. But in life, someone is always waiting to pop your balloon, but only if you allow it. Have you ever noticed how annoyed some people get if other people are happy? Why do people do that is another great question. And that should be assigned to the lunatic asylum piece. What is wrong with people being happy for source sakes? And why does life and people always have to be about misery, struggle and strife? And too often people in life let you down. Yet do we realise yet that this is a harvesting centre of epic proportions? People sucking the life out of each other, total energy vampires, spreading their own special brand of unhappiness and misery. And we've all come across these people. In fact, we may have been those ourselves. And yet, rarely is it addressed or even looked at. Why is that? Why would we allow our own happiness to be destroyed or ruined by these people? Because these people, in overview, are jinns, consuming the life force energy of others for sustenance. But the jinns have an excuse. They are non-corporeal and have no option but to consume energy that way. The people have zero excuse. And the bizarre thing is, most don't even know that they're doing it. Living life totally unaware of everything about or around them. Whether it's friends, lovers, work colleagues, and even your own families. Energy vampires who suck the enjoyment out of everything. And it's one thing they're not realising they are doing it. And in essence, they are an expanding subculture on this planet. But it is another for you to allow it. And what this means is, A, you don't value yourself enough. B, you tolerate too much shit. And worse, C, you are not protecting your own PSI field. Other people and life itself will always let you down. It's what they do. The key is not to let yourself down. Don't become the deflated balloon, devoid of life and energy, looking sad and withered. Don't become a copy of the energy vampires and retain the essence of you at all costs. Because ultimately, if you stand your ground and retain your sovereignty over your field, eventually those people drift away. You never needed those types of people in your life. You just always went along with it and them. And mainly because they were familiar to you or too family to you as well. But the family and friends are often our worst problems in terms of dictating how your life should and should not be. How you think and act or not, who you should love or not, where you choose to live or wish to be or not. But who made them your own personal judge and jury of how life should be for you? Look back at their lives. Are they happy? Content living? Fulfilled and honourable lives? If the answer is no, why would you copy them? The sad balloons people in life are because they allowed others to dictate and influence their lives, and so they become the copy and victims of the energy vampires. But people will always attempt to let down your balloon. It is what they do. The key is you not allowing it. Why do people do it? They don't understand life, can't comprehend happiness, and can't live comfortably in their own skin, and so destroy others due to their own failures and misguided lives. But a being that is deflated like the balloon is devoid of air, can no longer breathe or expand. Why would you do that to yourself? You can blame others, but it is you who allows it. From the glass half empty people comes the balloon not expanding. No expansion leads to deflation and essentially at an end of life, but without the death. If their balloon is not expanded, how can they see, hear or develop? They can't. But what happens if you become the balloon? It becomes inflated. And the more you find of yourself, develop yourself and learn just who the self really is. And as you expand, the balloon gets bigger. And if you keep expanding, you become the solar system, the galaxy, then the universe, and then the multiverse. Ponder deeper on that last line, as you will begin to understand the flow of life. But there's another aspect to the balloon that might make people really think of what type of balloon are you. The sad and deflated balloon rides the endless caravan on the linear conveyor belt of life. As the sad events and sad people dragging you down all takes its toll. But a balloon can rise if you inflate yourself, as nobody else will do that for you. The membrane of the balloon is your shield and PSI field. It can only be popped if you allow it. But what happens if the balloon truly inflates? It begins to rise and moves away from life off the linear conveyor belt and begins to soar upwards. Because the path upwards is vertical time. Through the macabre and on to no time on the pathway of the gods, the legendary golden path. Final piece tonight. Tuesday's show brought another swinging, healthy dose of reality to the light for purview. A harsh reality check of all the races, how things were so much better long in the past, but never in this lifetime. And the problem yet again highlighted who were the main protagonists. That many doubted in the beginning of the From His Story to Our Story series, but now after 35 episodes, there is no longer any doubt. Controversial subjects like the mixing of races, often danced in the realms of racism in the past and outside of THI, now brought to light in full clarity. And people beginning to understanding the importance of it, beginning to understand it is not racist to not mix, it is a genetic reality that needs to be addressed to the all. It shouldn't stop people wanting to mix, as that is a free will choice and should not be denigrated. But all should be aware of the consequences of such. Dancing in the dark and denied so much knowledge has been and led to our downfall. The key to the future is teaching, an enormous undertaking of epic proportions, as everyone has to unlearn the lies and distortions and then learn the new way and adapt to it. But as all people must be taught the new ways, all people must learn to take personal responsibility for their lives and their choices. We are only 7 shows into this year, and yet somehow there seems to have been a year's full. Everything is happening and unfolding so quickly now that many of you are struggling to keep on top of it and yourselves. Miscommunications arising because many are in a fog currently due to the onslaught of what is unfolding around you. People being uncertain of themselves, people not thinking straight, people being irritable, are all symptoms of integrating the external turmoil into the internal part of you. You are all told to observe it, not absorb it. And learn to take a little time of each day to clear the thoughts and interactions of others with you from your field, and just be at one with you. Then go again. We must address things a lot sooner also. No longer is time allowing the stretching out of issues external or internal. Everything is sped up, issues arise quicker, and we must learn to overcome them quicker as well. Take the 5 minutes of your day to clear it all out, and that way things will begin to flow within you and also flow around you. The old way of ignoring does not apply anymore. The out of sight, out of mind generally means ignoring it. But an overview, it really means you have no eyes or brain. No eyes or brain means you are blind and stupid. Out of sight, out of mind. Is that how we all wish to be seen as? And this is something that was said by Sir Anthony Hopkins that applies to this piece. And he said, my philosophy is what people say about me is none of my business. Who I am and do what I do. I expect nothing and accept everything, and that makes life easier. We live in a world where funerals are more important than the deceased, marriage is more important than love, and looks are more important than the soul. We live in a packaging culture that despises content. And all of what he said was about people being external and not internal. Stop stepping outside of yourselves and learn to be you. Love you, trust you, and internalize you. Because then the sad balloon inflates and begins to rise vertically on towards the golden path, where eventually you are back to walking amongst the gods. This has been the Truth, Honour and Integrity Show. My name's Thomas Williams. Bye for now.